guys, Lawrence here again from the Australian Trade and Logistics Corporation. Today we've got the pleasure of having David McCredie, the CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, David, for joining us.
Pleasure, Lawrence. Good to see you.
So David, a lot of stuff going on with the UK at the moment, but firstly about ABCC, the British Chamber of Commerce here in Australia. What are you guys about and how do you help the Australian companies and the UK companies for that matter?
Yeah, look, at our core we're a network. Like any association, any Chamber of Commerce, it's all about the people in our network and how we can help each other. And we're sort of uniquely set ourselves up back in 1910, so a little bit before my time, set up basically to really look at that Anglo-Australian trade.
Right.
And we look at it from a multitude of different angles. So we help Australians to go export and invest in the UK. We help British companies export to and invest here as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, are there any like typical Australian businesses that you work with or UK businesses? Are there a certain size or demographic?
Look, we like the Australian-British relationship more broadly. We're pretty broad in terms of the sorts of organisations we have on board. At the top end, you've got the likes of BHP Billiton, very big Australian company, the big Australian indeed, through to sole practitioners, and equally on the UK side, we've got some of the great global companies out of the UK, the likes of HSBC, for example, Jaguar Land Rover, and others. So at the bigger end, but equally we do a lot of quite small business work, particularly on helping British businesses come and invest here, particularly, but also exporting here.
Great. You mentioned the investment here coming into Australia. Are there certain sectors or industry targets? What's the flavour at the moment for opportunities between the two countries?
Look, inbound, you probably have covered this well with many other organisations. We're seeing a lot of strong interest, particularly around, I guess, the strengths that we all think of when we think of the UK, particularly around financial services, particularly around green and clean energy. Those in particular are really quite hot at the moment. But equally there's stuff around health, there's stuff around just about every sort of industry you can think of which has got a tech angle. So agri-tech, med-tech, a lot in the financial services, fintech in particular, a lot around cyber security as well, which is a really big opportunity, I think, for Australia, UK collaboration in that space as well. But pick any industry and we're seeing somebody doing something at the moment pretty much. Yeah, that's
right. I think there's as you say, that word collaboration has been around between Australia and UK for since inception, really, for Australia at least. But that evolution around Australia's R&D and some of their innovation coming through Australia is really over the last sort of decade and a bit more starting to take hold, especially in European markets and the UK. So I suppose I'm guessing that will attract a lot of those British companies to look here for investment. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's a number of different factors at play. So just sort of step back and give you a bit of a macro look. Most people are surprised to learn that the UK is the second largest investor in Australia behind the US. And most people are also equally surprised to hear that the UK is our second favourite destination as Australians to invest outside of the US. So whilst we talk a lot about Asia and the massive gains that we've made, particularly from an Australian point of view in terms of our trading relationships there and the volumes of trade and the value of the trade that we're doing to our north. On the investment side, it's a slightly different story. That's not to say that China and Japan and Korea and others aren't investing heavily here too. They are, but the growth that we're still seeing in the UK relationship and indeed in the US relationship as well is really strong. And I think that goes back to the old familial ties and to your point of there's been an interest for 200 odd years. It continues and in fact the interesting thing is with Brexit, I think one of the really great wins for the UK-Australian relationship out of Brexit, and to be honest, it was happening a bit before Brexit came on the agenda, was there's been a real reawakening of the opportunity there between the two markets. I think the fact that Australia have managed to sign free trade agreements with Japan, China, Korea, obviously the TPP as well, but also our relationships with our friends in ASEAN, New Zealand, and indeed our relationships with the US and others. I mean, we keep signing free trade agreements all the time nowadays. The UK look at that and in the same way as we look to the UK often as a landing point to take on the European continent, I think more and more so Brits are looking at Australia as a great opportunity to come and land here get themselves settled in the time zone, and then look how to branch out from here.
Yeah, it's a perfect comment, and I think I can definitely relate to a lot of Australian companies I've worked with over the years who want to go and penetrate the European market, and their first place of port of call is establishing first in the UK, as you say. So, and I can imagine that reciprocal positioning here across that Asia Pacific market.
Well, it goes back to the fundamentals that you've alluded to by talking about the history. You know, we're based on a British system in terms of basically all the fundamentals, whether that's rule of law, you know, the basic business practices, language, obviously, cultural customs are fairly similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're fairly similar. I think everybody doesn't mind a drink at the end of the day generally. No, it's not true of everyone, but you know, broadly there are lots of things that we share, and obviously the sporting connections, the cultural connections are all there as well. So it just makes that opportunity feel familiar, even when it's a first opportunity for people.
At the end of the day, business is all relationships. So whatever can build those relationships, whether it's sports or having a beer afterwards, or you know, having that ability to relate to your business partner who effectively represents your company and brand over there, it makes life a lot easier. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely.
Great. So with the UK, how's for some of our members who may be novices and look into the UK and as a market for their products or services, how would you describe the UK demographic for consumers? I mean, there's a lot of talk about some other Asian markets with ageing populations, some younger population markets. How would you describe the UK market from a demographic?
Look, broadly speaking, it's very similar to Australia in some ways. I mean, don't paint it as exactly the same by any stretch, but like most countries that were significant participants in World War II, we had a baby boom afterwards, so we have that large population at the back end here in Australia. We're the same in the UK, so we're starting to see those people become come towards retirement gracefully, but there's still quite a good younger cohort. I think there's a good diversity of population in terms of different countries that are represented. The United Kingdom obviously many years ago had an empire, the Commonwealth more broadly. There's representatives of basically all those countries, and many European countries that live in London or in the UK. Even when you go to the other cities around the UK, you find many nationalities in many of those places. So it's very multicultural. It's got great language skills to help you access the European market. But broadly speaking, it's not that dissimilar to Australia. If your product does well here, obviously do your market research in the UK, but there's a fairly good chance that it'll do well there too.
Similar taste, similar appetite.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Great. And do you think, again, for novice or people who have already looked at Asian markets and are now considering the UK and then potentially springboarding to Europe, what do you believe are they fully aware of those opportunities? I mean, as you said before, David, people are surprised about the level of investment between the two countries and how much trade we actually do with the UK. But with that in mind, for SMEs particularly and novice importers and exporters, I get the feeling they're not fully aware of some of these opportunities with Britain.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's probably true across the board. I mean, Austrade and others have done a lot of work to highlight the opportunities through their free trade agreements and elsewise. But I think Australian businesses generally don't export enough. And there's great opportunities. All the statistics will show you that companies that export and invest overseas tend to be better off. They tend to have higher revenue. They tend to be able to they tend to be able to pay their staff more. They tend to be more profitable for the shareholders. So it tends to be a win-win-win. Obviously, you need to do that carefully, and you need to be thoughtful about how you're going to approach it. But to your point, I think particularly about the UK, look, we've had such an obsession here in the last 10, 15 years about China in particular, but going back probably over the last 30 odd years, I talk about when Paul Keating talked about, particularly in the early 90s, about Australia's future is really to our north. I think we took that message on board, and certainly government support and certainly our press took that message on board, and certainly in the last 10 or 15 years that's been really strong cases particularly for growth in Asia. Look, I think Brexit's sort of been an opportunity to remind people that actually there's some great markets in Europe, and there's some great markets in our friendly, very good friends in the UK. So we've seen a lot of organisations revisiting their UK and European strategies, particularly in the last 12 or 24 months, with a view to actually, we probably haven't done enough here. What can we do to address it?
Great.
And just revisiting strategies, as you well know, from time to time you need to look at your strategy, and the same thing you've been doing for 20 years probably isn't relevant anymore. So people have taken that opportunity to refresh, and we're seeing some great opportunities at both ends, and some real engagement, and the investment dollars and pounds are flowing behind that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I definitely know from the ABCC point of view is that you guys are very much proactive in encouraging people to come along to your events, both in Melbourne, with Paul and Helen there, and yourself up here, is to really encouraging people to learn more about that. So that's fantastic, and that's part of the whole reason for today's interview is to show our members and our audience to get along, to be part of ABCC, and really uncover some of those hidden opportunities that they should be investigating for themselves as their businesses.
Yeah, absolutely, and in fact, we're not even just Melbourne and Sydney.
No, that's right.
We're running events in Brisbane. Indeed, tomorrow night in Brisbane. We're doing stuff in Perth and Adelaide, and we do some stuff in Canberra as well. So we think we've got a reasonable spread. We can't be everywhere, unfortunately. We'd like to do more in the regions and other places, but we're always keen to partner with people and find ways to help them out. So welcome people to come obviously along to our events. Be delighted to have you along and to understand more about their businesses and how we can help them.
Fantastic. Look, we'll always recommend our members who are interested in the UK market to join up and to get along and speak to you and your team. And definitely appreciate your time today. And we'll keep that dialogue going. We'll look forward to working with you on some initiatives and some other cooperative events as well in the future with ATLC.
Look forward to it, Lawrence. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. Cheers.
Pleasure.